So it's been a while since we've seen each other. What have you been doing?
Having my kidney chopped up.
Yeah, that's gross.
So did I tell you it was cancerous?
No, I just assumed it was. Were they just erring on the side of caution?
Yeah, I thought it would be too, but stage one, clear margins.
Yay!
Yeah. So they'll they're going to monitor me for the next 5 years with CT scans, but starting in 3 months. But
Okay.
but I'm feeling pretty lucky
Yeah. And
because
how
ordinarily those things go undetected. So
and did they find it as part of follow through with prostate stuff or
very indirectly, I had really bad pain a year ago from bladder spasms and what have you. And there was a suspicion that I had um, kidney stones. So they did CT scans, and that's when it showed up on the CT scan, trying to exclude the possibility of kidney stones.
okay.
So pretty cool.
That is
So we didn't say it. This is episode 13.
is it?
Yeah,
Oh,
a much delayed episode 13.
much delayed. Well, in my defense, it's the end of the semester. You are having surgery. It's the end of my semester, which is always a super busy time. And I'm just looking through some things, trying to wrap my head
So
around.
So I have some general subjects before we go to the program.
Yeah,
And
let's do it.
the first is that I've picked 13 ticks off me over the past 3 weeks. So I'm convinced that, well, one, they might be attracted to old, fat white guys, but I'm inclined to think that they are attracted to light colors. Is that a thing that you're aware of?
I actually think they're attracted to dark colors, but I could be wrong.
So John Abotham was been working at a site with a lot of ticks, and he said that when wearing his ordinary dark clothes, he didn't have problems. But when I went with him, I picked up 9 with my tan trousers, and he said he tried Tyvek coveralls, and on the Tyvek coveralls, he got covered with ticks.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know.
And then the bottom line for the tick experiments is no difference, right?
No difference. Yeah.
So do you have plans to do anything more with them, or is that the conclusion?
Uh, I mean, ideally, I would run some straight chemical comparisons using like putrescine or cadaverine, running it against CO2. Um, but
Is
I
it
don't know.
worth it?
I don't know. I'm not I'm not convinced that we're completely done. I'll put it that
Okay.
way. I'm not convinced that we're done. I think that there may be some, I don't know. I don't know if it's set up or what, but I'm not done yet.
So I mentioned that John's been working on this decomposing pig. It was set out by the anthropologist here.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a small wood, and its pattern of decomposition is completely atypical to what we tell everybody. It was infested at the head the way it should have been, but the maggots didn't proceed. And in fact, he didn't get a large maggot infestation till post-bloat phase. And his interpretation, which I'm inclined to agree with, is that it was cool, so they weren't growing very quickly. And he saw rove beetles come in and just chow down like crazy on those firsts and seconds.
Yeah. Where's it at?
It's near, gosh, what's the name of the town now?
Oh, up
It's
by Mead?
no, just the opposite. It's south of Lincoln.
Oh,
The university apparently has a farm. I want to say Syracuse, but that's not right.
Baresco?
No,
No,
no.
that's by me. Beatrice?
Well,
I don't know.
it's north of Beatrice. It's between here and there.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so
I
I'm
know I know that we were supposed to talk about bite marks and bloodstain patterns today. But what if we throw a wrench in it and instead we talk about coroners and medical examiners?
okay. I'm as unprepared for that as I was for the others. So perfect.
Okay. All right, let's do that.
So I'm going to be depending on you for a lot of this. The coroner system is comes out of British law, right?
Yeah. The Crown's men. The King Richard the First. That guy and wanting to fund the crusades. It wasn't just enough to tax you when you were alive, you had to tax you when you were dead too.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's see where I'm at.
So it predates the Magna Carta.
Yeah. Yep. They would go in and collect taxes on dead people to fund the crusades.
Well, it's not like they're in a position to complain, I suppose, but not so great for the heirs.
No, no, it's not.
Okay, and so the coroner was responsible for collecting the taxes?
Yes. Responsible for taxes. Now, let me see. Um,
I'm counting on you to fill the dead air here.
no, sorry. I wanted to make sure that I was being accurate. Yeah. So they were called the crowners, and that sort of got bastardized to the coroners, and declared death and collected death taxes, and then that system followed the English settlers to the U.S.
So they declared death and then collected taxes, but at some point that mutated. They had to give a cause of death.
Yes, I'm gonna assume that was for like some sort of documentation. I'm not sure when they had to start declaring how someone died. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, well, this is gonna be a super disorganized podcast, I can tell already. Okay, let's first talk about the difference between coroners and medical examiners.
And when you say let's, I assume you mean you.
No, I'm gonna ask you a question.
Okay.
Which one of them is an elected position?
Coroner.
Generally, yeah, although I think medical examiners can be elected as well.
Oh, okay. Classic trick question. Okay.
Question number 2. Which one of them has a medical degree?
A trick question. Neither one of them necessarily.
No, medical examiners do have to go to medical school.
The medical examiner does have to have a medical degree?
Yeah.
I know a coroner doesn't.
No, coroners are generally elected. In the state of Nebraska, we have 93 coroners because we have one coroner for each county, and they are by default the county attorney, who oftentimes in Nebraska will delegate that role to the county sheriff. And it makes sense, I guess. They're already at the crime scenes usually, so.
Does it make sense? So does that mean that on the official cause of death, the county sheriffs are making that designation?
Correct.
Yeah, that's messed up.
Yep. What do both of them do, regardless of their training? Like, what's their job?
I assume their job is to describe the, what is it, manner and cause of death.
Manner and cause of death. Do coroners have to have any training?
No.
No.
That I know. They don't even have to have a high school diploma, is my understanding. Depending on the state.
In Georgia, you have to meet the following criteria. You must be 25 years old, have no felonies, possess a high school diploma, and complete 1 week of death investigation training.
Well, at least they got 1 week of training. I guess that's something.
Historically, Kansas, there was no training, and the way I think the law was written vaguely enough that you didn't technically even have to be human.
Oh my God.
Let's see, 1,500 counties in the United States use the coroner system. So we have a dual system in the US. We have a combination of coroners and medical examiners. New York was the first state to have a medical examiner system in 1915.
And the medical examiner serves the roles of a coroner, but has a medical degree. Is that the deal?
Correct. And they can do autopsies. Although in some states, coroners can also do autopsies, even though they have no medical training.
So a logical person would ask, in 2023, why would any rational people have a coroner system?
Money. The most common states that have coroner systems are in the West. They argue it's because of rural populations and it's difficult to pay for medical examiners in those rural areas. Iowa just recently moved to a complete medical exam. Well, not just recently, like in the last 10 years, I think, moved to a purely medical examiner system because I think there was like a medical examiner in Des Moines and then coroners in the rural counties, but now they're a statewide medical examiner system.
So that's, to me, that's an unacceptable excuse. I mean, that would be the same excuse you would use for letting people practice medicine without a license. Well, it's, we don't have a lot of money, so Joe does the barbering, but also is doing his dentistry. I mean, that's a 19th century argument in the 21st century, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think part of the reason too is with a medical degree, they can go into private practice or a lot of them will work for a public office, but they can work contractually. And I don't know, maybe if we had a way that medical degrees were not so expensive, maybe they'd be more willing to do. I think there's also a fairly low number of medical examiners. I think that's part of the problem as well. So, like medical examiners and forensic pathologists, which sometimes overlap. Most medical examiners, I think, have a background in pathology. Actually, I know they have a background in pathology. And then they gain the forensic experience as like an extra year at the end of their residency.
Well,
And
is
I
there any
mean,
reason, speak as long as we're doing this randomly, is there any reason you couldn't have a medical examiner serve multiple counties?
no.
I mean, isn't that the solution to the rural problem? You have like the same way as they did with traveling judges, you have a traveling medical examiner.
Yeah, you know what else you could do is uh, train forensic nurses to be deputy medical examiners. They would have more medical training than a coroner.
Yeah, it would be difficult though on the autopsy side. Wouldn't you want to have?
Not on the autopsy side. I mean, from a case, like a crime scene standpoint. If you were covering multiple counties and you might have multiple bodies at one, just have like a deputy medical examiner, like a nurse or another doctor that has some training in pathology. But
So remind me, has there been a movement to go to medical examiners nationally or calls for that?
well, there's been calls for it. They called for it in the NAS report in 2009.
So I was throwing that softball up because I knew that. There's one thing I did know. So
We'll talk about the NAS report. Let's talk about that next time.
I
We've
think we
mentioned
said
it,
that last time that
you
we were
know.
going to talk about the report. I know this. I linked the report sometime back, so I shouldn't get yelled at for it this time.
Oh, so people might be reading it on their own. It's a good read.
Yeah, it's a readable document. That's what I
It
would
is.
say.
Yeah.
It's not one of these boring, impossible to comprehend federal reports.
So I'm looking at a map here. Centralized state medical examiner systems. We have Oregon. We have Utah, Alaska, New Mexico, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine. So that like whole pocket in the Northeast. County medical examiner systems, Arizona, Texas, Iowa, Michigan, Tennessee, Florida, and New Jersey. And then the remaining are either county coroner systems, all the states in the West, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado surprises me actually, Wyoming, Idaho, and Nevada, as well as Indiana, South Carolina, and Louisiana, and all the rest have some mixture between the two. So medical examiner systems concentrated in bigger cities, coroner systems in the counties outside.
What was it for New York?
New York is mixed.
Strange.
Mm-hmm.
If they were early.
I'm guessing coroner upstate. And I know they have a medical examiner system in New York, in the city. So
Yeah, it seems like it should be the statewide, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting relationship, and it does still boggle my mind that we are allowing the coroner system, so people with little to no medical training, determine cause and manner of death. And I know here in Nebraska, that has led to an underrepresentation of drug overdoses. And so when we talk about like opiates and we talk about rural, like opiates in rural areas, Nebraska's underrepresented when it comes to like how many potential drug overdoses we have because of our system.
Would you, for our audience, would you distinguish between those terms, cause of death and manner of death?
Sure. So regardless of whether you're a coroner or a medical examiner, part of your job is to determine cause and manner of death. So manner of death is one of 5 categories. So you can die naturally, you can die accidentally, you can die by homicide, you can die by suicide, or it can be undetermined. And then the cause of death is how you actually died. So heart attack, cancer, gunshot wound, asphyxiation, those are all causes. And then the manner fits in one of those 5 categories.
Excellent, excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you know how the system works in other countries, Amanda?
No, I don't, but I'm guessing they probably have medical examiners.
So
at least in like
what about systems where they have an inquest into death?
Oh,
because they do that in Britain, right? They'll have a hearing, and I don't know if it's a medical examiner or a coroner who leads the hearing.
Well, let's check. I'm going to guess medical examiner, but
historically it would have been something different.
I would find it interesting if oh, no. Inquest are the responsibility of coroner, who operates under the jurisdiction of the Coroners and Justice Act 2009.
That's Britain?
Yeah, England and Wales. The coroner must hold an inquest where death is violent or unnatural, sudden, and of unknown cause, in prison or police custody, suspected to be suicide. And the coroner may order a post-mortem examination, but they don't do it. So they're more of like an investigator.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
that if you read the Washing Away of Wrongs,
Mm-hmm.
which is I guess I don't know if I call it pre-medieval book on death investigation in China, they would have what amounts to a judge, a judicial official who conducted those investigations and ruled on manner and cause of death. So
Mm-hmm.
that's more than so those were practices from 900 to 1100, and so they're more than 1,000 years old. So there's a great precedent for how investigations could be conducted versus what actually seems to be the way they have been. I was
Mm-hmm.
just checking while we were looking here. I was wondering if Louisiana was different because of the Code Napoleonique and some of their other laws, but they have a coroner medical examiner system, but their coroners have to be licensed physicians.
Oh, good.
So that's a
That makes
positive,
more
right?
sense. Yeah, I think it's weird that it's weird that a coroner is an elected position. Well,
Oh yeah.
there's lots of weird things about it, I think. It's weird that it's elected. It's weird that in most states you have to have I think the non-medical coroner training, like they have to take a week or two of death investigation training if they have to take anything at all. So that's weird. And elected training and the when we think about it in terms of like what is best for everybody involved, we've talked about justice on the podcast before and how a lot of our systems are fairly unjust. This is one of those systems. If you truly cared about justice, wouldn't you just find the money and hire medical examiners
This
or medically trained coroners?
this reminds me of the police slash fire department slash ambulance service arguments. What I would say, absolutely essential services in any community. And yet, look how people, if I may use the expression, bitch like crazy
Mm-hmm.
over paying taxes for those essential services. And uh, I don't understand it. I don't understand how those things ever become a partisan issue. But just here in Lincoln, with our last mayor election, it was hugely partisan, which who supported whom. And uh, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't either. I I don't know. And I think we could help the situation by forensic pathologists get paid the least when it comes to like medically trained doctors.
God, yes.
And because of that, you take on huge debt to go to medical school. And most people aren't going to go into pathology when forensic pathology specifically when you know that you could make more money doing private practice general health or something. So um, I think we need to incentivize it in some way, whether it's loan forgiveness or better pay or both. Uh, it's just one of those areas that I feel like falls through the cracks, and people are like, "Well, it works okay enough," when in fact it doesn't. I know there was a whole series done by the Omaha World Herald called "Fatal Flaws" in the like mid 2000s, early to mid 2000s, and it was talking about this very thing, like how many cases had been misinterpreted or misrecorded because they either didn't have an autopsy, the coroner put down, you know, some other cause of death, and it turns out it wasn't that. Um, and it just so again, going back to that idea of justice, you have families who would like to know how their relatives died. You have potential people doing bad things, getting away with stuff because something might get categorized as a heart attack, natural death, when in fact it wasn't. And just for the sake of knowing, right? Just from like the basic idea of knowledge and finding the truth of that. I don't know. I just
This is analogous in some ways, Amanda, the problem with public health, because it's another area where you can't make a lot of money, but you can certainly, not only do you accrue all your medical school fees, but if you go ahead and get your master's in public health, which is kind of a requirement, you've got those grad fees on top of that. And these things fit together, that if there's a cause of death by disease that's not properly recorded, or things go unrecorded, then managing that disease becomes that much more difficult. And we saw that with COVID, with all of the underreporting or misreporting of cases. You know that resources weren't allocated as efficiently and decisions weren't made. And in part, that's because the data that was necessary to drive that wasn't available, because the people weren't available. This might be going too far, but in this country, I see this as I see the problems that we're facing as a reflection of this very profound anti-government movement that I saw start with Ronald Reagan, and his famous "the government's the problem, not the solution," which, as far as I'm concerned, is an absurd, obviously wrong statement, but it certainly appealed to a certain group, and that's progressed to the point now where anti-government ideas have become so mainstream that, in my opinion, people are promoting what amounts to anarchy. The breakdown of civil institutions. There's a reason for having these things, and I think this is one small example of the cracks that occur in a society where we have unqualified people, and the consequences are murders go unrecognized. As you said, drug deaths are underreported, so we end up not having the right information to make very, very important decisions. And we mislead ourselves at best. We lie about what the situation is at worst.
Yes. I was going to say something, and now I forgot.
So for those of us working in forensic science, we are, I know, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've certainly seen it. Not so much where that I've worked a case where they missed whether it was a homicide or not, but I certainly have seen autopsies that were by people who I assume were not forensic pathologists that had deficiencies, and deficiencies that I recognized, and I'm not a forensic pathologist. An example would be not talking about live or rigor mortis patterns in the body is an example I recall from one of my cases. And the liver pattern was actually very important in establishing time of death. And yet I'm the guy who brought it up, not the pathologist.
Yes. That reminded me of a case down in Kansas of a man performing autopsies illegally. So I just looked it up to see if there was any update on the case. September of last year, actually, was sentenced to 5 years and 9 months after pleading guilty to one count of wire fraud connected to performing an illegal autopsy. He had a business, National Autopsy Services, LLC, and he used fake credentials to convince a client he was qualified to conduct autopsies.
Was he a physician?
No.
Oh my God.
He assisted in the autopsy of Michael Brown in 2014 and repeatedly appeared on major news outlets as a forensic pathology expert.
How did he get away with it? for as long as he did.
He told CNN in 2014 he sometimes performed autopsy procedures without a physician present, and said that that was legal as long as he's under a doctor's supervision and the doctor signs off on the report. He didn't claim to have any specific license or certification. He said he knew how to do autopsies from on-the-job training, watching pathologists and assisting them at various morgues.
And CNN used that that was justification enough to get him to be a talking head.
I guess. Well, I don't know if it was CNN specifically that he went on. It just said like major news outlets.
Let's hope it was Fox News, for an organization I have no respect for their journalistic credentials, but maybe I don't have that much for CNN either.
He was banned permanently from doing business and ordered him to pay more than $250,000 in restitution related to providing unlawful autopsies.
Wow.
Yep. So I had heard about that case quite a while ago, but it's interesting that he just got sentenced last year, because I haven't checked recently. So sort of what we're talking about can lead to things like that, right? Where there's people that are saying or not saying they have training, and people just assume they do, that are cutting people open, writing reports about cause and manner of death, and then that gets in the court system. And we talked during our first episode of this series, right, about, or somewhere along the line, we've talked about how evidence gets included and how judges are the gatekeepers of that information. And
this is another clear, sterling example of not having a system that prevents having properly vetted, proper scientifically based evidence. I mean, essentially, that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about people who are not, in this case, medically qualified, but we can generalize and say scientifically qualified to be offering opinions on manner and cause. Yeah. So
the state of Nebraska does not require pathologists to perform autopsies. I think generally when they're done, they are done by pathologists in our state, but that's not a state law.
Yeah, that's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, I would go further, in questionable deaths, it needs to be a forensic pathologist, not just a pathologist. Board certified.
And I know that at one point, our state, there was a mandate for a group to get together to talk about medical examiners and requirements of autopsies, and I don't think it ever happened. It was passed by the legislature, but the group was never formed.
What organizations would that be? Like law enforcement?
I don't think. Well, maybe. I don't know. I'll have to look it up. I'll have to refresh my memory about it. I just remember that there had been a law passed about putting together a committee, like a standing committee, that would sort of revisit autopsies in Nebraska when they were required, who was doing them, and it just never.
Crazy.
The governor never put it together. In Nebraska, autopsies are only required at county expense if a person dies who's less than 19 years of age from sudden death. It does not need to be performed on someone under 19 if the death was caused by a readily recognizable disease, or the death occurred due to trauma resulting from an accident, or B, the death did not occur under suspicious circumstances.
What about deaths in custody? Isn't that automatic?
Oh, that is. Yep. Let's see. When it appears that an individual has died while being apprehended by or while in the custody of a law enforcement officer or detention personnel, the coroner or coroner's physician shall perform an examination, a test, or an autopsy, as he or she may deem necessary to establish by a reasonable degree of medical certainty the cause or causes of death. So that's a or, not an and.
Wow.
An examination, a test, or an autopsy.
That seems like a big loophole to me.
Yeah. So it's an interesting area of forensic science that I think gets overlooked. because
So I
people
think I
assume.
think one of the things we want to say before we finish, assuming we have people who watch this podcast, that's item one, and then assuming they're in different places, go ahead and if you actually have listened to us, go ahead and make a comment. And if we didn't talk about your state, put it in the comments, and we'll do a little research. And in an
Hmm.
upcoming podcast, we'll talk about sort of what the situation is in your specific state, if you're curious.
Yeah. Yeah. We have the most experience with Nebraska just because we're here, but it's one of
Crazy.
those areas. Yeah. It is crazy. It it's so crazy. And it's one of those areas that regularly blows my students' minds when they find out about it. Because I think they're thinking, like most people, that the person doing a specific job is trained and educated in that job. And I'm of the mind, and I know we had talked about this previously with, crime scene investigators sort of moving crime labs out of police jurisdiction so that the police officers can do their actual job, which is investigating. Uh, I feel the same way, particularly in Nebraska. Like, let the county attorneys do their actual job, let the sheriff's department do their actual job, and leave determining cause and manner of death to the people who are trained to do that.
You would think that. It's so hard for me to understand why there would be opposition to that change.
I agree. And at one point, we actually went to the legislature to talk to lawmakers about it. And it was too late in the legislative session for them to do anything because the unicameral has a strange schedule when it comes to introducing bills. And um, we sort of let it fall off. But even the lawmakers that we talked to didn't know that like they didn't know that that's what the corner system looks like in Nebraska.
Yeah, if we were into political activism, and I don't know, maybe you are, that this is something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Uh, well, speaking of non-forensic science related political activism, we just got notified today that period at College of St. Mary, our period awareness, period poverty group on campus, and Access Period, nonprofit in Omaha. We just got a declaration by Mayor Gene Stothert in Omaha that the week of May 22nd is Period Awareness Week. So,
Hooray! Congratulations.
has a gold seal on it and everything.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good. Well, okay. So we know you have a history of success. Now we can build on that in the forensic arena.
That's right. I would be willing to take up the fight. I just wouldn't. I need somebody else that's more familiar with how legislatures work and bill introduction and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, that seems like something we should be able to find somebody.
Mm-hmm. Seems like it, but I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's a weird thing that we just keep letting happen.
Well, so this fits into our general theme of questionable practices in forensic science, but this isn't even a forensic science problem. This is a much broader,
Yeah.
Problem. And as Amanda said, we're not the first people by any stretch to bring this up. That's the other weird thing, that you've had lots of people look at the system and say it doesn't work. It's not right. And yet here we are. And time for reform.
Time for reform.
We need somebody like Teddy Roosevelt ready to come in and go trust busting and challenge the norm here.
Wasn't there something about him carrying a stick or something? Was that Teddy Roosevelt?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Speak softly and carry a big stick. That's TR.
That's what we need. So next time we will talk about the NAS report actually, and then we can use that to talk about some of the issues in the pattern evidence.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Well, let's call it. We'll call it Puts there. My glass isn't empty, but it's getting close.
Mine's close. Yep.
Okay, very good.
All
Okay,
right.
thanks everybody. We'll talk to
Bye,
you
everybody.
again soon.